Christy, welcome back to my channel. Welcome to day 5 of my 2024 Valentine Card Series. Today I'm going to be making a card using Hello Bluebird's Pig Out, Strawberry Jam, and Cake Time. So I have stamped those images out on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink. And I'm going to be coloring to match some pattern paper from the Simple Stories Sweet Talk 6x6. So I'm going to tear out the sheet that I'm going to use for my color inspiration and tuck that under my cardstock panel, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm going to start with my pigs, and I want to color them to match the background of that pattern paper, so kind of like a peachy pink. So I pulled out R000, R00, R01, and R02. I started with the R01 on the first layer because I wasn't quite sure how dark I wanted to go with these little piggies. But then when I started to blend out with the R00, I quickly realized that my tip was corroded. That happens sometimes when you've let your markers get too empty, and that is the case. Unfortunately, I really need to do a marker maintenance day desperately. But anyway, I don't have any new tips. I need to order some, so I'm going to have to skip that R00 marker entirely. So instead, I'm going to start with the R02, blend out with the R01 for the midtone, and then use that R000 for the highlight. This first little pig is facing almost completely forward, so I shaded him equally on both the left and the right, leaving a nice highlight on the center of his face, the part that would be protruding out the most, catching the most light, and also on his belly for the same reason. For the second little pig, he is shifted a little bit more toward the left, so his shadows are going to fall heavier on the right-hand side of his body. And so I'm starting with that R02 once again, laying those in, and then I'll come in with the R01 and start to blend that out, just making sure to really pull that darkest color into the midtone. And then I'll use that R000 to finish him off, just coloring all the way around, filling in any remaining white space. So giving him a little highlight on the face, on the top of the arms, and the top of the legs. And I missed that first little pig's back of his hand, so I went ahead and did that. And then for the snout, I'm just going to use the darkest two colors, the R02 blended out with the R01 because I wanted to create a bit of contrast there. I did go back and do a second layer of the R02 just to deepen up the shadow down at the bottom, and then blended that out once again. And then I want to give these piggies some rosy cheeks, so I'm going to bring in RV10 and RV11. The pinks that are in the sprinkles are a little bit more cool toned, so that's why I went with the RVs rather than just the plain Rs. I did also throw a little RV10 into the inner part of the ear. And then I'm going to bring in RV13 as well. Mine is a bit leaky, so I pulled out both caps to equalize the pressure. And I am going to do the frosting on my little cupcakes, which are from the Cake Time stamp set. And then I'm also going to do the little napkin that is hanging over the edge of the picnic basket. So I can have that little pop of color in one more place. So I have it in 3 places on the card. Next, I'm going to pull out the hot pink in that pattern paper and keep that RV13, but add in RV14 and RV17, and I will do the cupcake liners, just adding that darkest shade, the RV17 down toward the bottom, and then the highlight up at the top. And I did go back and do a second layer on there as well because I wanted to create a lot of contrast between that paper liner and the actual frosting. I wanted there to be quite a bit of definition between those two. So I just did a full second layer. And then for the cherry, there are actually 2 different red sprinkles in that pattern paper. There's a darker red and then a brighter red. I'm going to use the darker red combo for the cherries with R46 and R59. And then I'm going to move over to the picnic basket, and for that I went with E53, E55, and E57. I colored the inside with the E57 because I figured that would have a bit of a darkness there because it's cast in shadow by the lid. And then I also used the E57 to add a bit more shadow to the outer edges of the basket and to the inner edges of the top of the lid because it's kind of propped open. So there would be a shadow cast in there right in the center underneath that handle. So I'm blending out the E57 with the E55 and then using the E53 for a little bit of a highlight. And then I am going to move back over to my pigs. I'm going to use W1, W3, and W5 to do their hooves, starting with the W5, and then I'm going to add in a little of the W3. You probably could only use 2 colors if you wanted to because this is a very small little area, but I wanted to have a lot of contrast on these images, so I went ahead and squeezed all 3 shades in there. And then I'll use that W1 for a little bit of highlight right on the very edges of those little hooves. Then I'm going to move on to my other red combo, and I'm going to go back with a brighter red combo, which is my favorite red for the strawberries. I'm using R22, R24, and R29, which I think is just the perfect strawberry combo. And I put my shading down toward the bottom right and my highlight at the top left. When I'm not sure where to highlight, that's just typically the way that I go. Then I'm going to use BG10 and BG11 to do all of my dishes and just make them look white, but to have a little bit of highlight to them. So I used the BG11 first and then blended out with the BG10 and then left some white space for the highlight. And I wasn't sure at first if I was going to do the picture to match or if I was going to do that in a contrasting color, but I ended up deciding to keep it with the same shades. I did decide that I wanted to add just a tiny bit of detail to those mugs though, so I went back to my R29 and just drew a tiny heart in the center of each of those. Then I'm going to do my flowers using RV00 and RV10. There is a very light pink sprinkle in that pattern paper. It's really hard to see it because it's almost nearly the same color as the background, but that's what I was pulling for that. And then for all the greenery, I used YG11 and YG17. And I did forget to do the strawberry caps, but I went back and did those later on off screen. And the whole time I was coloring, I kept trying to think of what I wanted to do with that blanket, but I ended up deciding to go back to my pattern paper pad and pull out a piece of plaid pattern paper that I thought would work really well to do some paper piecing. I haven't done paper piecing in quite some time. So I stamped that out, and now I'm taking my Cutter Bee Teflon coated scissors and just trimming that out very carefully right up against the black line. I don't want to leave any remaining space outside that black line as I'm trimming that down because I want to die cut this and still have that white edge so that the die cut matches all of the rest of the die cuts. To eliminate any of the white core of that pattern paper from showing, I'm going to grab a Memento Tuxedo black pen and just go over the edges, the cut edges, so that they are all going to be black, which is just going to help it blend in a little bit better with the black stamped lines. And then I'm going to grab some liquid glue. Mine got a little bit clogged, so I just had to grab the pin and get that flowing once again. And then I'm going to adhere that right over top of the stamped blanket that is on that cardstock panel so that when I trim this out with the matching die, it's going to have that same white border as the rest of the images. But to make that image look as defined as the rest of our colored images, I also want to add some shading. So I went back to my warm grays. This time I pulled out W00 and W1 and just brought a little bit of that in on either side so it would look a bit more natural and like it matches everything else. Then I'll grab a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and get that going off to the side. Just make sure it's flowing nicely, and then I will go over the eyes of my two little piggies to make them nice and bright and shiny, and then I'm going to trim all of these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I'm taking a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock that I've trimmed down into a small rectangular panel. And then I'm going to use the Lawn Fawn Cloudy Stencil to add some Distress Oxide ink onto this. I'm using Salvage Patina, although I noticed that I got a little bit of red on the edge of my sponge. So I grabbed a baby wipe and just brushed that ink off, and then also wiped it carefully off the Bristol so you can't even tell that it was there. And then I just continued blending on that ink and working my way down that panel, turning my stencil so that I got a different cloud formation each time. And yeah, that's an easy fix. I went ahead and left that in the video because I wanted you guys to see that even I make mistakes. Stuff happens, but usually you're able to fix it. So luckily that was easy enough. And then I want to do some splatter detail. So I just pressed a little bit of ink onto my acrylic block, added some water to that, mixed it up to make it a bit more fluid, and then I'm going to tap that off the edges. I didn't want too much on this one, just a little bit to give it some movement. And then I'll bring in a second panel, and that one I have trimmed down with the Hello Bluebird Grassy Knoll dies. And I'm going to bring in some Twisted Citron Distress Oxide ink first, covering that entire panel. And then I'll bring in Mowed Lawn just at the top to darken up the grasses. Just pressing down a little bit carefully on those grasses so that I don't bend them. Although because these are shorter grasses, it's a little bit easier to do. And then I just went back and forth between the two to make the transition a little bit more smooth, and then did some splatter detail with the Mowed Lawn. Then I'll set that aside to dry. Then I'm going to take some Lawn Fawn Mermaid cardstock and trim off the bottom edge with the Hello Bluebird basic borders to give me that scalloped detail. Then I'll take those dried background pieces and I'm going to adhere those to this mermaid cardstock panel. That way I'll have a little bit of like a frame around it, giving me a nice little edge with the colored cardstock, which is also going to tie into that pattern paper. So I'm gluing the cloud border on first, or the cloud section, I should say. And then over top, I'm going to add my grass and just make sure I have that on that panel right where I want it. And then I will take that to my paper trimmer and just trim down the top so I have just a little bit of an edge there. Then I want to die cut part of my sentiment. So I'm using the Hello Bluebird Nightly LC lowercase large alphas, and I'm going to spell out the word hogs, and I'm trimming those out of some Lawn Fawn Barn Red cardstock first, and then also out of some Lawn Fawn Guava cardstock, because these letters have the main part, which you can use on its own, but they also have a border around the outside edges, and I thought it would be fun to swap these out so you get a little bit of both colors. So I'll show you what I mean in just a second. I'm just going to pop those dies right back on my sheet so that I don't lose any of them. And I just hold them in place with some post-it tape to keep them centered on the cardstock so they don't shift around too much. But yeah, I'm going to take out each of the letters, just line them up there, and then pop out the inner portion, separate that from the border. And then once I have that, I'll just swap the two colors. So the Guava cardstock H is going to go inside the Barn Red border, and then for the reverse for the opposite one. And I'm just going to work my way along each of these letters. Some of them, like the O and the G, also have inner parts that really help make it look more complete. So I'm just popping out the part that I don't need and setting that aside, and then making sure that I keep that inner circle of the O that is going to pop into the center, which just makes it look much more finished in my opinion. So the G is the same way. It's going to have that little inner portion for the top circle part or oval part that needs to be popped back into place. So I'll make sure to keep that when I pop out the middle portion, the very center portion, which can be thrown away both on the top and the bottom. So you just have to make sure as you're doing this that you save all the important little bits. I don't throw anything away until I have completed all of my letters, and then I can just go ahead and throw away any of the little scraps that I kind of pushed off to the side. So this actually makes 2 sets of the word. So if you were to make 2 cards, you could use both of them. You could just use the opposite one on the other card for a slightly different look. At this point, I wasn't sure which one I wanted to use, if I liked the guava with the red border or if I liked the red with the guava border. So I just set them all off to the side and I would decide later on. In the meantime, I'm going to pop the rest of that piece of barn red cardstock in my MISTI so that I can heat emboss the rest of my sentiment. This time I'm going to use the Hello Bluebird Big Hugs Woodland stamp set, and I'm going to treat that paper with my Rabbit Hole Designs powder tool and then ink up my sentiment with some Versamark ink, which is just a clear sticky ink that works great for embossing because it really grabs a hold of your powder and holds it in place while you heat set it. So the one that I'm using is the Lawn Fawn white embossing powder. I just keep it in this big tub because that's the one I use the most often. I'm going to coat that, tap off any excess powder, and then heat my heat gun off to the side for about 30 seconds to a minute. Then bring it to both the back and the front to minimize the warping until it's nice and bright white and shiny. And then I'm going to pop my card base in my MISTI so I can stamp on the inside. I'm using Lawn Fawn apricot cardstock and bubblegum ink, and taking another little pig from the Pig Out stamp set and the sentiment that comes with that set that says, "You make me smile." But it didn't look very Valentine's to me, so I decided to take the 2 little hearts from the Big Hugs Woodland and just stamp those inside of the balloon to give them a little bit of detail that also kind of ties in with the love and Valentine theme. So this is another card that doesn't blatantly say Happy Valentine's Day, but I like that because it's gives you more opportunities to send this card out. If you don't end up needing it for Valentine's Day, you can still save it for any kind of love-themed card. So now I'm ready to start assembling. I'm going to take that pattern paper that I used as my color inspiration and glue that to the front of my card base to cover it completely. It is a A2 standard size card, 4 1/4 wide by 5 1/2 tall. Then I'll set my focal panel down in place to use as a placeholder, but I'm not going to glue that into place just yet. I'm going to work on my sentiment and make sure I have enough room for that first before I go ahead and adhere that focal panel down firmly. I did decide to go with the guava letters with the red border. I thought those accented the rest of the sentiment strips the best, so that's the way I decided to go. But honestly, I think either one of them would have looked good. There was a tiny little piece in the S, or actually 2 tiny pieces that I needed to pop out, and so I just used the pin from my glue to get those out to make sure that the letters were looking how they should. And then I'm just going to arrange them so that I know where I want them to go. I wasn't sure if I wanted to kind of stagger the height of the letters or if I wanted to have them just go straight across. So that's why I laid them out first. And then I'm going to adhere the top part of my sentiment so that I make sure that I have room for that, because it's going way up at the very top of the card, but I wanted to leave just the tiniest little sliver of pattern paper showing above it. And then I can go ahead and take my letters and adhere those. I do have to be careful to make sure that I am also catching the frame around those letters, because otherwise it would just fall off. So that's the great thing about having glue with a super fine nozzle, is that I'm able to not only get behind all of the letters, but even behind that very thin little edge. So I did decide to stagger the height of my letters. I'm going to have the H and the G on the same height, and then the O and the S slightly different. So that's why I went ahead and did those two letters first. And then because the bottom of the G is going to hang over the top edge of the focal panel frame, I went ahead and adhered that while the glue was still wet. Then I'll glue the S down into place. And again, just making sure that there is enough glue on the back of that, but not so much that it's going to really, kind of ooze out the edges. I want to make sure that, the card doesn't end up getting too sticky. The outer part of the O just did not want to stick down, so I decided to adhere the rest of it first, and then just take that frame and add the liquid glue right behind that tiny little frame. Like I said, it was easy enough to do with that super fine nozzle, and then just get that lined up into place. Then I'm going to take the next part of my sentiment, which says "and kisses," and adhere that right under the H, kind of making sure I have about the same amount of space under the H and the top of the blue frame. And then the "your way" didn't seem to fit, so I decided to leave it for now because it made sense with or without it. So I just decided to wait and see how the rest of the card came together. So I'm going to move on to my images, and I'm going to do the blanket first because that's kind of centering the entire scene. I added that down toward the bottom of the grass. And then I'm going to adhere my little pigs. I arranged those so I could see where they were going to go before I added that liquid glue. I wanted the sitting pig to be at the top right corner of that picnic blanket, so I would have plenty of room to arrange their little Valentine picnic on it. And then I wanted the other pig to be kind of running in from the left-hand side. And then between them, I'm going to add in the picnic basket. And I also stamped and die cut a tiny little strip of grass, and I'm going to adhere that right in front of the picnic basket just to incorporate it a little bit more into the grass. Then I have a couple of plates. One I'm going to put in the running pig's hand, just making sure that it looks like he's actually holding that. And I did tip it at a little bit of an angle just to give it a bit more movement since he is running. And then unfortunately my camera died, so you missed seeing me arrange the rest of the items. It's a very old camera. I've had it for a very long time and it's been acting up a lot lately, so we'll see what happens with that. But anyway, I just arranged the little picnic on the blanket. I made one plate with cupcakes and then had the pig that's running hold a plate of strawberries. And I gave them the little teacups or coffee mugs on saucers to drink from, and then added the little pink flowers all around the little scene. And then there ended up being a little bit of empty space right above the sitting pig's head, so I decided to add the rest of the sentiment right there. So the whole thing says "sending hogs and kisses your way," which I just thought was really cute. I love a good pun. I, of course, had to add a little bit of stickles to the card. I'm using my favorite Stardust stickles. I did the frosting on the cupcakes, the centers of the flowers, and the hearts on the mugs. And that is going to finish up this card. So I will lift that up to the camera so you can see all of the detail and give you another peek at the inside. I had so much fun creating this card. For whatever reason, I just love these little pigs so much. So be sure to hit that like button if you enjoyed it too. You can also leave me a comment down below, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted whenever I post a new video. All of the products I use will be listed and linked in the description bar below in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And I will also put up day 5 of the previous 2 years of Valentine Card Series in case you'd like to keep watching. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I will see you soon in another video. Bye-bye!